open up whereby you're doing the second part of your work session at 10:30. And then this afternoon you have Board of Health. Commissioner Keach, are you doing the legislative committee stuff?
Yes, and actually I got a scheduled conflict on Thursday
Okay.
with KOMP.
Okay.
There's two activities in Olympia on the 17th, and then the legislative steering committee is pretty much all day.
Okay.
Can I call in?
Are you going to be here?
This Thursday?
Yes. We are meeting.
Well, the canvassing board of two, so you have to be there. I just leave. I'll just have to jet out like a 10 to 2. I usually go to commercial break.
Yeah, I want to say that I've got meetings in Squim on Thursday, but I'll check my calendar.
Can we move it?
It's probably a little late to do that. I can cancel it if you want me to cancel it.
You could ask if Bill can call in. It might be, well, I don't know, Rich, do you know?
I know.
He could probably call in. I don't think that would be an issue.
Cool.
We have callers to the show, so yeah.
Can we do that?
Okay. So Mike, you're doing the canvassing board then on Thursday and Friday?
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't quite sure who was on board for that. And then Commissioner Zeiss, you got the Peninsula Regional Transportation Organization, and I printed out the packet, the agenda packet and stuff.
Great,
You got
thank
all
you.
that?
Yes, I sure did. Thank you.
And then next week we have transit on Monday because of the holiday yesterday. We moved it. And pool district on Tuesday. Anybody have anything that isn't on there?
Just confirming KMP on Thursday. My Bill sent a call in. So I'm going to guide him over there. Just call him.
Casey has meetings and I guess we will go to the canvassing board.
So we'll ask Bill to call in and I'll show up.
I'll be there. Mark something change to the warrant.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else on the calendar?
Not that I know of. This is the calendar. It is a special meeting with Port Angeles on Thursday, 9 a.m. Regarding their District 2 appointment schedule and procedures. I did put it on the calendar, but I can post this if you want.
Yeah, just
And then you all on Friday, I put on your desk a letter from the United States Department of Commerce, U.S. Census Bureau, about a survey they're going to be sending out. Request gathering information on basic characteristics of all local general purpose and special district governments. I don't know who will receive this survey.
I don't either, but I remember when we got one several years ago, I think they was giving us a heads up, and that, they are asking all governments to reply. And last time it came to me to fill out, and whoever got it, whether it was the chair or whoever, it came to me to fill out the information about operational information and demographic information on the county. And so when it comes to care, we'll figure it out.
I was at a meeting this weekend, a fire meeting, and they said that the response you can do electronically. I wasn't sure whether it was just an email response or a website.
No, we haven't received it yet. This was just warning us it's coming, and please be on the lookout. Or at least I haven't seen it yet.
It's pretty generic.
Okay, anything else? Agreement with the Superior Court regarding handling of judicial administrative records.
Okay. Lindy, you want to come on? You signed it.
I did.
Good morning. So the draft agreement that you have before you is an effort to just carry off this administrative thing. In the beginning of this year, the Supreme Court adopted a court rule that pertains to how the public can go about accessing judicial administrative records. It's basically the court rule equivalent to the Public Records Act. But when it comes to certain court records, the courts might not be in sole possession of them. There might be some executive departments, for example, HR, auditor, information and technologies through their internet or through their email servers that also potentially could access and release judicial administrative records. And so this MOU is proposed to be signed by this body in your executive capacity and the courts to make sure that if there is any requests for judicial administrative records in the possession of other executive departments, that they will refer those for handling to the courts themselves. So that's what this MOU seeks to accomplish. It's based off of materials prepared by the Office of Administrative Courts, as well as the MOU out of Spokane County. So if there's any questions,
I have one, and Trish and I talked about this. As you know, we're in the process of trying to decide how to revamp our countywide public records requests, putting as part of a budget process and trying to streamline things. And the question that we had was, does this MOU, and you're the perfect person to ask, does this MOU protect the county from providing these records that are in our office or in HR, that kind of stuff, when we get a countywide public records request for things? So, and we do.
you're protecting the
In that
context.
we're protected under the Public Records Act, says if we have it, we have to hand it out.
Yeah, so what the MOU would do is the request would still be processed. If, for example, if you had the auditor's office have a request made to them, pursuant to this MOU, they would alert the public records officer of the courts, and the court would then take over the shepherding obligation for that particular request. And then the auditor's office would respond to the requesting party saying that the matter is being processed. It's been referred to Superior Court in accordance with GR 31. And then the auditor will be permitted to close out the Public Records Act request under 4256 on her.
There was my question, can we really close it
The
out?
auditor's office is a perfect example, because a payment record is open to the public. But when I present an order to the auditor, an order of payment, they also require the attached backup, which is the billing, or so the attorney-client services that may have been provided, or the medical records for the expert service that may have been provided. Those things are sealed. So yeah, the payment can be given up and not the backup for that payment.
Gotcha.
So we do, it needs to go to us.
So it's just a degree of cooperation.
Yes.
And what would be helpful for the courts, I imagine, is because you're signing this in your executive capacity, and there might be other departments, I'm pretty sure it's just going to be HR, auditor, and IT, but to the extent there are other executive departments, if you could inform and maybe the next EOH meeting that this agreement is being aimed, we can give copies of it to the executive departments as well.
I imagine it's going to be the Superior Court clerk as well. I mean, he's got all kinds of different.
Well, there are different kinds of court records. There's the case file, and then there's administrative court records. Now, the clerk's probably going to be in possession of the case file, and there's a different court rule that pertains to how you access this. But this agreement is just specific to admin court records, and it should primarily just be Ms. Clevenger's department.
All right.
And Judy falls under
Yes.
And who?
juvenile.
Oh, okay, sure.
So that's what we got, unless you have any more questions. It's been reviewed by the presiding judges. District Court 2 has taken a look at it. They're comfortable. Theirs is the exact same agreement, just Superior Court says District Court.
And do each of the court, superior and district, have their own public records officer?
Yes.
Separate from Trish?
Yes, so the PRO or Superior Court Public Records Officer is Ms. Clevenger. For District Court 1, it's Keith Wills, and then Glenn Pitt in District Court 2. And then Juvenile Services has identified their own PRO. The name, is that Judy? The PRO for Juvenile Services.
I don't know, I think it was going to be Jody.
Jody. It's Jody.
Are there other entities within the county that have their own public records officers besides the courts?
Nope.
Well, yes and no. A long ago policy did require every single department to have their own designated public records person. And we had been coordinating with the prosecutor's office. Those people, when they got a request, if they could easily produce it themselves, they would. And what we found, and then if not, go to IT, some people, go to the prosecutor's office, some people just automatically forwarding everything to the prosecutor's office, burying them in paperwork that they didn't need to have. And so as part of last year's budget process, a request came from the prosecutor to give them more staff if they're going to be continuing to be buried with public records. And in substitution to that, we had some discussion, and with Mark's blessing, we proposed to the commissioners what we thought to be a less expensive option, and that was to create the countywide public records officer coordinator position, if you will, in the commissioner's office, which my plan was to designate Trish. She's getting ready to go to training on this. And then she then would accept the responsibility for all public records that came into the county in addition to the individuals, so that she could track it. Because what we found out is that on several occasions, individual records were being sent to the individual public records officers, say at the sheriff's office or DCD, and they weren't always being followed up on. Somebody lost track, and we had a couple of those. So we decided we'd put it together, have one place using our automated system that to check in, send it out, keep track, and then Trish would, or her successors, were trying to figure out what we're going to do now with Cindy leaving, would work with the prosecutor's office on those things that truly only needed to go to the prosecutor with her judgment training. And then the prosecutor's office and Trish together would still go out and help to train all the individual department people, and they would still fulfill their requests that were just unique to their department, but they would do it through Trish, so we could track it better. That's our plan. We're working on it. It isn't fully in place. It will require a couple of changes in policy. It'll require training for Trish, and then ultimately training for everybody. So this would be one more place, one more step as I read this and coordinated with Trish, is that while we might get it and track it, we would reply back that it's been sent to the various courts, and we rely on them to come back and tell the people requester exactly what it is they're able to do.
And consistent with the court rule, so you have 4256 that applies to all of us, and then you have the court rule that just applies to the courts. The three courts have adopted policies and procedures. That's all online. It identifies who PRO is. It walks requesting parties through the process, has sample forms, so that it should be fairly expeditious. This agreement is just trying to recognize that some court records that might leak out through 4256, your standard Public Records Act requests, need to be processed through GR 31 compliance, and that's all this MOU does.
So from the perspective of the public, we're going to implement a system that says Trish, the person that should contact.
Yes.
And
That's our plan.
Yeah. No, that's
We're in the
exactly.
process of doing that. And it's going to take away some of her duties. And again, the plan was, because we had Cindy, who was also up to speed and how to be your clerk, we were going to move her in. Now we're losing Cindy. I'm not sure how we don't know who we're going to hire and how much experience that person has, but we need to free up some of Trish's time to take this over. is our plan, and so we're going to look to that as we hire the new person, looking for somebody with the skills, talent, and ability to take away some of the BOCC clerk work.
So we need to do this MOU, and it sounds like some policy changes before we implement the new system.
Well, we're already kind of doing it.
That's what I was interested in. A member of the public wants information.
Send them to Trish, send them to the Commissioner's office right now, because unfortunately, we found too many cases in the last couple of years where a couple of them dropped through the cracks and they didn't get responded to correctly, and so we've had to, that's why we're taking control of it.
But that is more 4256.
That is
like
more
compliance. This is a different
It's a
matter.
different,
Yeah. So, the judges have looked at it, they're comfortable with the agreement, it's modeled after other agreements that are used in the state. So with your blessing, we'll just remove the draft watermark, get the judges to sign and present it for signature next week.
And the next agreement, number 3, is the same thing only with district court. The big changes I see between Superior Court and District Court is Superior Court is very clearly a different branch of government. District Court is not. Yet they have to comply with the same Office of Administrator of the Court rules. District Court belongs to us. We're liable for what District Court does or does not do. So where we're not, for Superior Court, much more so. But at the same time, it's cooperative. We just have that, we have that problem. District courts belong to the county, Superior Court belongs to the state.
Okay, Parks, Fair, and Facilities, authorization to advertise facility and equipment position. Approved on the 2016 budget.
So this is the last of the positions that were approved in the budget but not yet filled. The board asked to have brought forward before deciding whether we could afford to move forward or how was our budget set up. And in all candor, this was one of the 2 positions that for whatever it's worth to you, that I actually recommended in the budget. I mean, all of the others were asked for and approved during the budget session. This position, as well as the one extra in IT that you already previously approved a couple weeks ago, what I heard in my first round of meetings with all the department heads was time and time again, and I asked each department head, are there any positions anywhere in the county other than the ones you're asking for that you feel are a stumbling block, that haven't been filled, or a stumbling block to you getting your jobs done? And this was by far the one that was most often referred to and as being a problem. And part of it was, and as I explained to each of the department heads and to the commissioners during the budget process, as you may remember, part of it was because the Parks, Fair, and Facilities Department back in 2009 through 2012, when we were no longer allowing any positions to be hired during the big recession, they had a lot of people retire, and they got stuck. They went down further than they should have, quite frankly, number one. And number two, Joel, as he mentioned in his discussion with the board, he had just an unusual amount of people this last year that were out on basically injuries. And so an awful lot of the projects that were scheduled and needing to get done, and people were expressing frustration because they weren't getting done quick enough, were just the simple fact that his department, his people working incredibly shorthanded, both because they were down 3 people, as I recall, from where we used to. At one point, they were down 3 people, and then they had a couple people at the same time out on light duty. So, Joel, we want to take it.
Well, that was a great summary. I put together one, if I believe something else. So, During the 2016 budget process, the Parks Care and Facilities Department requested the addition of a maintenance for one position. The request, along with all other countywide departmental requests for new positions, was initially approved. The Commissioners later decided to reevaluate all requests for new positions and asked that departments again submit those requests in order to make a better informed decision as to the need for any and all potential new employees. I regret that our department has been for many years operating well below an adequate level of service. Due to staffing reductions over the course of the past 4 to 5 years, we have been unable to maintain our facilities to an acceptable minimum level of cleanliness, safety, and accessibility. We're currently responsible for the facilities such as the main courthouse, the historic courthouse, the jail, which is a 24-hour facility, the 3rd Street Professional Building, which houses the health department, and later this year will be housing the remainder of the Health and Human Services Department, the Veterans Center and Annex, Juvenile and Family Services, which is also a 24-hour facility, and the old juvenile facility, which is now currently utilized as a storage facility. Of the facilities listed above, Of the facilities listed above, there are only 2 maintenance workers assigned to the courthouse, the jail, the 30th Street building, and the Veterans Center and Annex.
Collectively, not to each, but collectively.
Oh, right, there are 2 people who go over all of them. Correct. We're also responsible to a lesser degree for the Health Department in Forks, the District Court 2 in Forks, and the Sheriff's West End Detachment at Slip Point in Clallam Bay. Additionally, we're also responsible for the annual capital facility maintenance and improvement project. In 2016, there are a total of 30 projects currently scheduled. 19 of the 30 are already underway at various stages, and all of these require some level of involvement by our maintenance staff. These projects are in addition to our day-to-day maintenance responsibilities throughout our facilities. The same maintenance workers that are responsible for our facilities also play a critical role in our parks. Of the current 21 parks, all 6 have structures. Although there is a year-round park manager assigned to both Salt Creek and Dungeness recreation areas, the maintenance staff must at times assist with major construction repair projects. We also have a day-use maintenance worker who maintains the day-use areas, but as with the campgrounds, our roving maintenance workers most of the time assist. And what roving guys are, we have 2 of those who go literally everywhere. The addition of the requested maintenance worker 1 position would allow us to dedicate much needed time for regular daily maintenance in the courthouse, the jail, and the juvenile facility. During some weeks, we can spend up to 50% of our time with jail alone, and oftentimes there will be more than 1 worker required for the larger task. This means we must pull another worker from either juvenile or the roving crew to assist. Because of this, in similar situations, the juvenile facility has also been underserved and maintenance projects continue to pile up. Finally, the addition of this position would significantly improve our ability to meet current and near future maintenance needs at our facilities for the public and staff. It will allow us to plan proactively, which saves us time and money, instead of the current status quo of responding to issues as they occur, which typically is more costly. If this position is not funded, county departmental, and public complaints will increase. The current bottleneck being experienced throughout our area of responsibility will continue as we try to do too much with too little. So please consider the addition of this very critical position. Our facilities continue to age. With that comes an increased responsibility to maintain them to the best of our ability, while at the same time improving our level of service to other county departments and to the public. And the last thing there is just an estimate of what that position would potentially cost, around $51,000, and it would be an ongoing expense.
So it doesn't get them back up to the level they were at 2009 when we started the cuts, but it does restore 1 of the 3 positions that we have been down, and it really comes with my strongest recommendation. We did look at the possibility of contracting. We have some union issues and problems with that also. We looked at ways to reduce other areas, and it's just, I just truly believe we got too far. when the ad hoc decision we all made, or at least Commissioner Chapman and I made together back in 2009, to just not allow positions to be filled. And, you know, we lost over 40 positions in 3 years that we didn't fill through attrition, and they got 3 of them.
Well, I saw what happened last year, just about the time we had the fair. Joe was carrying around mirrors so that people could see which are, at any rate, was very busy, they were shorthanded, but I picked up on a couple of minor things going on in the office, safety-related issues. And I watched how long it took. And I was really happy that you were able to respond, and what I didn't know was that he was out of staff. Joel's the one that actually went and took care of it. But it was a safety issue, and I appreciate you doing it. So I support this.
As do I.
Okay. Thanks.
So bring me the BAF, and I'll sign it.
Thank you very much. Lots of people will thank you.
Notice of hearing on proposed amendments to Clallam County Code Review.
We have, in the code, we have a number of administrative changes that we need to make. We've added a couple of parts since we last updated this, and we were wanting to add them in numerous places throughout the code. And we're also removing one part. We discovered last year that the property was actually donated to the Public Works Department, so it's no longer going to be on our inventory. We've also changed the language on occupancy of our campsites at Salt Creek and Dungeon S. We have had an issue from time to time, people picnicking or trying to charge their electric vehicle or other things in campsites, making them unavailable to people that are wanting to camp.
You're like using them as if they were a day use site?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, correct. So we just kind of tightened up that language today. We are also proposing to change the title of Section 3. It's currently titled Dogs, Cats, and Other Pets and Livestock. I'm just changing it to Animals to cover everything, including one of the. In addition, we're proposing that no person shall intentionally feed, attract, or artificially sustain wildlife in Clallam County parklands. The feeding of indigenous wildlife is prohibited in all county parklands unless otherwise posted. This has always been an issue. We've never had an ordinance to back up trying to prevent this. It's just trying to educate. We've had this problem when I was out in Salt Creek, and still there's a large raccoon population out there that some people find cute, some find annoying. Anyway, they try to feed that. Also at Robin Hill, we've had an issue. People trying to feed the squirrels and whatnot out there. Also in that section, again, we just kind of tighten up number 3, grazing and ranging of domestic animals and livestock is prohibited. There are 2 parts that we do allow that. At Robin Hill, we allow cattle grazing on some of the pasture out there, and also the fairgrounds. Those 2 exceptions were not part of that, so we just added that.
Just out of curiosity, how is that grazing managed where it's allowed?
So
We have an agreement with a local cattle person that they actually, it serves us very well actually. They're grazing on about, so it's close to 20 acres, probably about 15 acres. And they maintain the fences, they maintain the gates, they maintain all of that, and water systems and stuff like that, which is a huge help to us. And we've been in that with agreement with them for many years. So it works out really well for us.
In Section 4, the changes here was a result of a contact from a county citizen. When they were reading this, they saw some irregularities regarding horseback riding at the fairgrounds and on our trails. So again, this language was just tightened up to better answer those issues. Section 6, we added a ordinance that planting any vegetation in parklands without the prior approval of the department is prohibited and subject to immediate removal by the department. We've had groups with best intentions come in and want to plant like an Arbor Day or just as a civic project, just come in on their own without contacting us and plant trees or whatnot. That may not have been the best thing to do at that site. So just kind of that's something to cover us on the bill if they ask them not to do that.
This is the guy in the Parks Board.
Yes.
These are their approval.
Yes.
Any issues the Parks Board had to really kick around and debate?
No, these are pretty straightforward. And like Bruce stated, several of them have been long time issues. And we just cleaned up the
Also, pretty common sense. So we'll do a public hearing, call for a public hearing next week. And a public hearing every week after that. Is that work for you guys?
Yes.
Any other questions? For next week. Thanks very much. Public Works. Amendment 1 with Bridger, increasing contract amount for additional work on the Donald Creek Bridge project.
Directly, we can go over as well, please, for the benefit of our new commissioner. We've got 2 projects, bridge maintenance project going on this year. One is to use some scour hardening of the piers on Ward Bridge, which crosses Dungeness through why it's all over Bridge now. That one, and then the Bell Creek Bridge has long been identified by the county as particularly sensitive to seismic issues, the way it's built. We've received some funding to do a seismic retrofit to it, and harden it up. It is probably going to be our recommendation, and some of the other board members have already heard this, as we progress closer to that we in fact don't spend the money on hardening that bridge. Let's just get that bridge out of there and replace it, which means there's going to be some money out of pocket. But we can use the money that the state has given us to harden the existing one to put in the pot to do a replacement. Right now we're in the process of having a consultant, which we hired a year ago, work through the process on both of these bridges. This is an amendment to the contract that we have with the current consultant. And now you go forward with details.
Yeah, this, so we have one contract that we entered into for Trackllam Consultants for the 2 bridges. The supplement this in front of you guys is only for the McDonald Creek Bridge. When we originally scoped out the 2 projects last year, the McDonald Bridge was a seismic retrofit, like Ross said. And we've struggled with that ever since we applied for that grant. Steve Therapy was in here, and he thought that was crazy that we would actually spent money on that old bridge. And so we've always anticipated a possibility of replacing the bridge. And so we prepared the 6-year tip at the end of last year. We included quite a bit of funding from the REAP funding. We've been working with Joel on that. So we're expecting to fund the replacement of that bridge instead of the seismic retrofit. The bridge is a 1958 concrete bridge. It's kind of like that 30-year-old car that needs a new engine. It's kind of like that. So we'd really like to replace it. And so what this supplement does is it takes us through the next phase of our study with the consultant, which is geotechnical work and hydraulics work. We get our cost estimates for land and specs for replacement. So this would add $115,000 to our contract with First Radon for the McDonald Bridge, which would bring that portion of the First Radon's contract to about $315,000 for the McDonald Bridge. And we're hoping that out of that will come a rock solid cost estimate that we believe is going to be lock, stock, and barrel in the hopefully less, but approximately $5 million range. Everything, engineering, inspection, construction for that bridge. 748,000 of that would be already secured from federal, and $3 million is what we're anticipating from refunding the balance from the road fund.
So anyway, this is just a amendment to our contract with First Radon to do the necessary hydraulic investigation necessary to go out, put our work out there, do that, and figure out the foundations before we recommend the design. So that's what this is.
So we're still in that $3 million neighborhood for replacement? 3 to 4?
It's including engineering and everything is probably going to be 4.7 to 5 million.
So it sounds like what you want to do is properly, and I commend you for it, get your cost estimate put together, and then you'll look at the resources and come back and recommend to the commissioners, here's what you recommend we do to fund it.
Correct.
Are we holding out for excess funds in the
we're okay. In the big box picture, we have sufficient funding to do this. It is an appropriate venue to spend real estate excise tax on, and so we're asking that be considered as a source of funding for this project because it fits the parameters that fund is restricted to. If the board chooses not to use REAP, we still have sufficient funding in roads to move forward with this approximate cost estimate to replace the structure. We still have that funding. We'll work with the board as we go through our next 1 or 2 transportation improvement programs. This is not a project that's going to happen in 2016 by any means. This is, as we get this information, then we can come to you as we get into our 2017 and further on planning process, and we'll have updated information for you. And like you accurately articulated, we will have a recommendation by the time I'm hoping by the time we get to the later on into 2016 as to what the cost figure will be, what kind of structure it would be, and whether we have, well, we'll bring the dollar figures to you, what we have in the bank, what we expect this to cost. So there's going to be a number of different points along the line that the board is going to have decision-making points as to whether or not we move forward.
So is this already in the funded portion of increases, you're just going to push out other projects. It takes priority over an unfunded project.
Correct.
Any questions?
Just for my own, the edification of the new commissioner, would this type of funding mix be, federal versus local, be typical for a bridge replacement project like this? Getting about, maybe 18%, 17%, something like that, or is
Not
it changed?
typical, normally it's the other way around. The main issue that we've been having,
Well,
with this bridge is that it's,
let me jump in. I think that, yes, it's typical to have federal funding mixed in with the county funding. Generally, it's up in the 80% range rather than down in the 18% range. It was just that when we funded this particular bridge for size of retrofit, this was a number of years ago. State funds were very tight. We were very fortunate to be able to get what we did. So, and the bridge just did not quite fit. It wasn't bad enough from a structural standpoint to fit into the full-blown replacement program where we might be able to get 70 to 80% federal funding. It was standing there, it was too good, a good shaker's going to take it down. So we got what we got, and we're thankful for what we did get, but at this point, we don't want to try to make a silk purse out of sows here. So that's why we're headed down the path towards making a recommendation to replace it and just be that would complete that corridor essentially. We've got Cedar Creek done, we've got Benjamin Nest done. This is the last hole in that we'd like to plug up with something that fits the design criteria for this area seismically. So yes, it does fit within, but usually we would get more federal money.
One thing I would offer, that while past performance doesn't always predict the future, what I have seen in my 10 years here is that we quite often, and I specifically think of the Lower Elwha Bridge and also the Deer Park undercrossing project, we, at this stage in many projects, we go forward with identified local money. And by the time it actually gets built, we keep an eye out and manage to apply for more grants. And I suspect, and almost always, in my experience, we get them by the time we actually build it. But you start it, it becomes shovel ready because you get the engineering done, and then all of a sudden there's another pot of money that appears available. We can apply for it, and we get it, and we move on. This is a multi-year process, and our success in getting them to shovel ready by identifying our own funds makes us more likely to get future monies that become available. And I suspect, well, it doesn't always happen, it happens most of the time.
Correct, and fortunately in this case, I can assure the board that there is sufficient funding within the 6-year transportation improvement program to complete this project as we expect it to be completed without getting outside funding. But Administrator Jones is correct, oftentimes other stuff does pop up that we can reach out and grab because we're shovel ready or a number of other reasons. So we're constantly looking for that, but there's sufficient money to go forward and complete this process even if we get no additional federal funding.
Okay.
Since bids are coming in on Carlsberg 1st March, something like that?
The email that I sent you today that came from Bob indicated that as of this morning, there are 32 people have asked, 32 different companies have asked for plans. We haven't received any bids, and we won't yet, but they've asked for plans in order to be prospective bidders, and that's, from what Bob mentioned to me, that's one of the biggest this early that he can remember ever getting. 32 different companies looking for the information in order to potentially make a bid.
Maybe we toss it out, because as we take a look at those bid results, now we're going to fund that project. The issue that I see here is I don't see any application for roads, county roads money on Carlsberg, but is REIT a potential funding source?
Yes, they don't deal with REIT.
And therefore, when we take a look at those bid results, we want to look at the big picture.
Yes.
We got a potential cost increase for here, how did that one come out? I don't know. I think we got enough money.
This cost increase is coming straight out of roads, not out of REIT. And this one that you had in front of you is coming straight out of roads.
We did program $3 million in our JET 460 primary.
Right. And it's in the capital plan, Joel's 10-year plan, that REIT 2 years or 3 years down the road, if I remember now, the $3 million. But it's not asking for an increase in REIT.
Just some place to think about what these bids.
Questions? We'll move it to the next meeting. Okay, that's the end of this portion of the session. We have to schedule 2 items after our regularly scheduled meeting at 10. So we'll take up our regulars if we need them at 10. And we'll come back into work session, hopefully around 10:30 and 11 to discuss contractors, development council, and YMCA. Anything else for now? Please have your finance meeting.
No,
That's coming up.
I want to say it's the 3rd of March, if I remember correctly.
They got to push down. In addition, it's supposed to be scheduled for February.
The finance committee meeting? No, she asked for that. I think it was actually March 10th is what she originally suggested.
But you guys are still on track with that?
I think.
I've heard it.
Yeah, no, I don't know for certain.
No agenda.
No.
If that agenda does come forward, let's note it up for work session.
Absolutely.
So we'll discuss that. We'll do that. See if they will do So we'll recess for 10 minutes. We should follow our regular scheduled meetings. So we move it after the meeting. And the first one is discussion on the draft contract with the Economic Development Council. I know Mark, you've been working very hard on that issue, and so I guess we have representatives of the EDC here who've been working with Mark. So I'll throw it over to the 2 parties that have been negotiating.
Come on up, Larry, all 3 of you, please.
So for the record, the full board and Jim Jones and Bill Greenwood, the executive director of the EDC, and you can introduce your guests. And Larry represents the Board of Commissioners, the EDC board. He was our appointee last year when the board changed. So, okay, thanks for being here. I think I'll throw it over to Commissioner Rosales for right now.
No, thank you for being here. Just as a public review, we've been working on developing some appropriate metrics so that this board and others can better understand the work that's being accomplished by the EDC. So that you both know, I've been working collectively for the last several weeks with Bill and EDC staff to come up with these metrics, and if it would be helpful perhaps for you guys to maybe just take a couple of minutes and take us through the metrics that we've come to and help us understand how you plan to track and report on those over the course of the rest of the year.
Why don't you take a shot?
Absolutely. So what I did is you all received kind of our reporting document, how we'll report this back to the county. And looking at the scope of work, each page is kind of broken up into sections. The strategic objectives will be on the first sheet here, and as you notice, I've plugged in a few numbers already, just so you can kind of see the trends there, which is indicating we're talking about the no net loss of private sector jobs between between 2010 and 2020. Employment, 25 to 60, 93% employable citizens, looking up from 91. Median wages of consumer price index plus 4%. Median household income of consumer price index plus 4%. So that will all be reported here on that first page, and that's right out of our strategic objective. And then the second one, the goals and outcomes. Support 15 companies to significantly expand or look to become county. So with a list here, we won't give specific names of companies because of privacy issues, but we will list the types of assistance that we provided in assisting a company to expand or locate here. And do 75 to 100 million of investment in facilities. So if we will track that there in the second portion. And, you know, it's not just the EDC that makes that happen, so we will also track, as much as we can, what other partners within the county has played a role within that investment in the county. Create over 500 jobs. We all know that the EDC does not create jobs. We assist in businesses creating those jobs, so we will track that there by giving you the number of jobs that we assisted in with an expansion or relocation. Ensure an ever-building pipeline of new products. We will track those by projects A through G here. It could be more, and the description of the project that's in the pipeline. That's how we'll track that one. For the business attraction and marketing, I broke that up into 2 separate sheets here, and we will track this kind of like as a tally. So we will tally businesses attracted to the region. We won't necessarily give out information. We'll leave that up to them to publicize that. Number of jobs attracted to the region, and if you look so on through the rest of this, it's all tally metrics. The second one is the business retention expansion. Number of businesses expanded due to the EDC. Number of businesses retained due to the EDC. Number and types of jobs retained due to the EDC. Number of businesses assisted. And then we'll also give a little description of the types and of assistance that we'll provide them there. And amount of financing provided to existing businesses due to the EDC. So that would be if we connect business to some financial options. And additional requirements. On the back here, coordination with other Clallam County economic development partners, chambers, the ADA, the county report, the cities, that kind of stuff. We'll list here and kind of how we cooperated with them and partnered with them. Collaboration with and cooperation with permitting agencies, counties, cities, that kind of stuff in regards to assisting businesses through that process. Regional economic development policy proposals. Most of this comes from us working with Washington Economic Development Alliance, and they do all the policy for economic development organizations, and we are a member of it. So we work with them in regards to creating policies for our types of organizations. That's kind of the gist of how we put that together, in hopes that this document will provide you guys with a little bit more of solid documentation of what we do as a corporation.
So Jennifer, I don't know if you had a chance to talk about what's already being reported, Mark, and what I was kind of wondering about is this reporting compared to what you already sent to the Department of Commerce. Are you including DOC? I mean, is this in addition?
Department of Commerce, we have a separate contract with them. I shared those metrics with Mark, and some of them are similar, very similar to what we will be tracking for you there. Pretty much everything kind of grouped into this. It's a little bit more detailed than what they asked for at Department of Commerce. Okay. So it's pretty much the same sort of metrics.
Well, I appreciate you actually asking for, that accountability, and it's the transparency that I like, because I know from working with, the EDC that the Department of Commerce has, a lot of information is requested. I can't think of the last time that made it into the hands of the public or anybody at this table.
Well, I'm hopeful that by tracking and reporting on this information, that the public will better understand what the EDC is accomplishing. We'll all be able to share a common language when we're talking about it. When you looked over these, did anything stand out as unusual or appropriate or inappropriate, or do you have any thoughts on what we're actually asking for here?
The only issue that I have, Mike, and I think this is a delicate one where EDC is involved in assisting the company to relocate, but hasn't happened. I think it depends on the company and their desire, but the issue is protecting confidentiality. They may be in negotiations on the space, the lease for the property, or whatever it is. And so that'll be, I would hope, if we err in any direction, we err in a direction of making sure that that company doesn't decide, I can't trust this county. I don't want to do business here. We won't protect the confidential information. At the same time, I think it's important for the citizens to know there's 10 potential customers or clients out there versus 0 or versus 1. So that, as I went through, that's the only issue I saw, Mark, was, and I trust the EDC and the board, but if there is an issue that we've got, you say there's 3 companies, let's have a talk. We want to make sure we protect the identity, if that's what the client's request is.
I would agree. Yeah, in our conversations over the last few weeks, yes, sir.
I participated in some of the prospecting meetings, and I know commissioners have been present at a few of those. I think that's another way for you to know or validate the reality of it. So I would just offer that as a potential solution to disclosing confidential information.
And I would offer in that regard, one of the problems that we had, and I have seen and we've been trying to deal with, and was instrumental in the switchover of the makeup of the board of the EDC, is that any government that has a majority of their board, i.e. we had 2 commissioners at a meeting, has to disclose the meeting, it's got to be an open public meeting, and any documents that a majority of the board are given have to be made available to the public under the Public Records Act. And so that was one of the problems that over the past several years has been a problem with the EDC being able to do its work, was just what you talked about, they couldn't guarantee the privacy of the information. And hence, that was the idea about getting commissioners off of the actual board. And our board appointed Larry to represent the countywide interest, was so that the confidentiality of the private enterprises that were working with the EDC could be maintained. So point being, we can have 1 commissioner at any one of these things, but as soon as we get 2, and as soon as documents are given to 2, we have to make them available. This is not something that can be exempted under the Public Records Act.
And we want to.
Yeah. And the other question that I just had for conversation today with you fellas is how often would you like to see reporting back from the EDC staff over the course of the rest of the year to get updates on this? Commissioner Chapman, you mentioned perhaps quarterly updates. I recall the former meeting, either you have any input on that?
You're sitting on that workforce committee now, aren't you? Mm-hmm. And I think that they report the quarterly statistics. I used to hone in on it every single time. How are we doing here in Clallam County? That might be, timing. It'd be nice to time the report relative to when they release their information, so that you have, if you will, the latest. I think they're about 30 days out of phase. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, I'm not certain. That frequency seems appropriate to me, at least, as a trial here throughout the rest of the year. My hope would be that we can make adjustments as necessary. I think that our goal should be reporting often enough so that we're sufficiently updated, but not so much that it's making an undue impact on your work itself.
What did you negotiate the contract?
Well, we left the contract as it was intended based on last year's board's decision. So the amount...
Changing only the scope of work.
Right. The scope of work includes additional reporting but the remainder of the contract would be the same as this board
Currently, it
did
is
last year.
reporting written progress reports with each request for payment, so how
Yes.
often do they request a payment?
Every month, and what we get with that is the general, okay, we performed this percentage of the work, and that's standard from last year. What I think Commissioner Zayas was talking about more was and that's just in paperwork, that accompanies the bill. They've been doing that all along. He was talking about more of an oral presentation to the commissioners that the public would have access to, and that's what we were thinking of adding quarterly if the board wanted it. It isn't in the contract currently. It could be an amended scope of work before we bring the contract back.
You guys support both sides, you support that, Mark, and does EBC support that?
I think we would support any request to make this.
It's hard for me to say right now for the monthly reports, how much you'll be able to fill all this in on a monthly basis. I think we'll have to see as your tracking goes along how that's working. But I would be happy with a quarterly, in-person presentation that covers all of these metrics that we've been discussing.
We'd be able to do that in a forum where someone from the public says, well, you had a metric and you haven't talked about it.
Right.
Please talk about it.
Right. And really, I think that it's important for the public to understand, in essence, what they're getting for their investment. Yeah. But I think that the more we talk about these kinds of issues in the public forum, the better, hopefully, we all understand the complexity of the issues and how different entities are working together. And my hope would be that perhaps we can elevate the entire community's understanding of the issue.
After our meeting with Mark, I think we became very comfortable with providing these metrics just the way he suggested. And so we don't have any problem with it at all. In fact, we're happy to do it. I think it's going to be good for the way we've been running things. It falls very naturally into what we've been doing anyway, but we haven't been reporting it exactly this way. So it's not going to kill us to report in this fashion. It's a good thing to do.
So Jennifer is the one that gets to do all the write-ups. Tell us the truth, Jennifer.
Yeah.
How much extra work is this going to matter?
Actually, I was talking, as we were talking as a team, and we're just going to meet, monthly to make sure that we get everything that we've done down, so that we're not at the end of the quarter going, okay, let's compile it. We're just going to make it part of our routine now to sit down and actually start recording what we're doing, which is a little different. We just do it. So that's our job. So I think it'll be pretty not too much.
I guess just I'd also like to say publicly that I would love to see over the course of time, I don't think it's reasonable to expect that you're going to, that any organization is going to be successful in achieving every single goal or every single outcome. And I would love to hear, as you're moving through your work, if there's a direction that you've been headed that you find, as you're reporting on the numbers and out doing your work, that this isn't, the landscape has changed, or this plan isn't working out the way that we thought it was. I don't view reporting on that as a failure. For me, the failure would be if you don't acknowledge it, talk about it, and help us understand what you're going to do differently based on the information that you've learned. So I guess I wouldn't expect that every one of these numbers are going to be perfect all the time or else. But when we start to see a trend that's not moving in the direction that you are heading, or that you intend to head, then let's use this as an opportunity to talk about why and what we can do differently.
Well, especially if you're able to quote the sources. That was the thing that I used to pick up on those quarterly meetings with WordSource. is the trends that were going on in different sectors, because then it was, well, what's really going on there? And being able to have that conversation where you come in and you say, here's what's different. You know, here's what has happened as a result of the sawmills closing. And if you want to know that loss in employment, and there is a decrease in employment, then what's your knowledge about where people are headed? You know, are they going to the I-5 corridor for jobs, or are they getting some retraining to stay here locally? And that's important, because that's hard to do.
Anything else? I don't know, Larry, do you want to add a few things?
Well, I do actually reached out to you, Commissioner, to really find out what the expectations were from, there's certainly been a change in the commission, and wanted to touch base with you all and see what the expectations were from me in the role sitting in the county seat on the EDC board. I know it's kind of putting you on the spot at this moment, but I would like to reach out to you individually, or if it's more appropriate to come back at a future date and say, here's the expectations we have for you, Larry, in this role, and I will certainly be here at meetings if that's what you'd like. But if there's additional information you'd like from me, I'm open to whatever you would like me to do to fulfill my duties.
Well, I have not put full thought into it yet, so I may come up with more. However, right off the bat, I would say that my most significant interest would be doing what you can to help bring a more broad perspective to this organization. You know, the staff is by necessity very focused on the mission of the EDC, and as commissioners and as someone who is out in the community focusing on a variety of things, this being one of them, I think that when you see or are made aware of connections that have to be happening or conversations that have to be happening between entities, something that the EDC may be out to be engaged in, then my hope would be that you can help be that more broad-based voice with regard to this organization.
Did you have a conversation with regard to the idea that support from the county, and rather than make a single payment, what has developed is, this is the second of what was intended to be 3 years. But just to be real clear, it was, if this doesn't work, then we got to look at Plan B. And I hope that that's on the table. You know, I'm from private industry, and I believe in that. You win or you lose.
And part of my joining was to help to foster private sector money to be contributed, and I think that has gotten some good groundwork at this point in time. It's not to the level where it can replace the public funds, but certainly that we have seen at the EDC that there's more private money coming in, and we hope to continue that, certainly.
And that, congratulations. That was well done. The number of private industry companies participating in the EDC today compared to 24 months ago is very dramatically. But I just wanted to make sure, Mark, that conversation with regard to the county's expectation, you were at the table, but I think Mike would agree that the conversation was that there's an expectation of assistance that ends. Okay? And whether it's 3 years, the 500 divided by 150, how you define the time frame, we can have a conversation, but the concept was real clear. It ends.
I'm certainly aware of that, and in fact, one of the reasons why I've been trying to work this way is because I'm aware that the commitment, the multi-year commitment was made, and I think that it's only fair to acknowledge that and to try and be true to the sense in which that commitment was made. And hopefully, the work that we're doing now will help provide us with the kind of information we need to to make that decision that you're just talking about. Is it working? This is an idea that the board had. It's the same thing. Is it going to work or not? And if so, great, go on. And if not, well, what do we need to do differently? So that's definitely how I've been thinking about it.
I'm not trying to undercut you at all. The simple fact is I'm trying to support what we're going to do this year and next year with a clear understanding. You're going to come to us with, did it work? Or if it did not, what is it we want to change? And I'm very pragmatic about what that would involve.
Anything else, sir? You want to add?
No, I don't have anything else to add.
Jim?
So next steps, I would ask what the board would like me to do. My recommendation would be if the majority of the board would like to bring the contract back, we would do that next Tuesday. It isn't an amount, even though it's in the budget, that is above my ability. I can only approve up to $50,000. So this is more than that. So the contract would need to come to the board for approval. I mean, technically, you could vote to approve the contract since this is the third time it's come in front of you this year now, and we could bring it. I wouldn't recommend that. Full disclosure, we would ordinarily want to put it on at least next Tuesday's work session, advertise to the public that we're considering the contract. And but you can also bring it to another work session if you wish. So just whatever the board would like.
I need to bring it to another work session.
I don't see any need to bring it to another work session.
So we'll note it, we'll put it on next Tuesday's agenda. The reason we'll do that is so people can come and make a public comment on agenda items before our Tuesday meeting, so we definitely don't want to take action today. So we'll note it up to next Tuesday, if the full board agrees.
And
Are you guys comfortable with that next Tuesday?
process-wise, do we need to do a public hearing?
No.
And this one's in this budget, right?
Yes, it was budgeted specifically in this amount.
Okay.
So the last tidbit there, Mark, is the quarterly. Remember, we had just a brief conversation here. Is it your recommendation that we make an adjustment to the contract?
That's probably not a bad idea, just to make that clear.
We can amend the scope of work to require a quarterly oral update to the board. That would be the.
Maybe for now, Larry, we'll come with the implied expectation that you as our representative will help deliver that quarterly report. And why don't we start with that, and then if the board needs more from you, they can talk to you individually, but that'll at least get you quarterly in front of us as our representative, and even Jill and Jennifer and any other board members that might want to come, but maybe we'll just build that into your expectation if there's any questions, objection.
And I don't know if we still have a
Is
conflict.
that okay with you?
A million years ago, we used to have the board of directors meetings on Tuesdays starting at 10 o'clock once a month. I don't know if we still do, we can work.
It'll be at a work session on Monday. That
Okay.
quarterly report would be.
Oh, that would
Monday.
be there. Okay.
Good days.
Okay.
So we would give you a half hour on the Monday work session.
Perfect.
Does everybody use that? Does anybody object to that?
That sounds really helpful to me.
Yeah, it's good.
So whether we need to put that in the contract.
I'll add it into the scope of work
Good.
as an expectation.
Anybody wants to add?
I'd like to say thanks, Mark, really and truly, for a different set of eyes looking at a complex issue and your hard work to come to a solution.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say we wouldn't be here today without the hard work that Mark put into this effort and meeting with your folks and the hard work that you put in. So the two parties could reach agreement. I don't think we'd be here today ready to move the contract forward. And Mark's leadership was completely key on that.
Yeah, particularly as on our draft to reporting that.
Okay.
Thanks, you guys, for
So it'll be on next Tuesday's agenda. One of you probably should be here in case there are some questions at the comment period to, if anyone were to come up, so. We probably both don't need to be here, but we need to be here. Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, it's 11 o'clock, so next item is a discussion. The board had asked the YMCA to address more fully the extent that they are aware of the projected startup and ongoing operational costs against likely revenues for the opening of the SARC. And in order to better understand the likelihood of a successful partnership with the SARC board to reopen the pool We had invited representatives, I believe, from both organizations, really.
Just a while. Well, we invited any SARC folks or board members that wanted to come as well, but this one was primarily a Y-centric request or expectation, so I don't know that SARC planned, anybody from the SARC board planned to be here for this one.
Okay. So representatives of the Y, for the record, why don't you just state your names?
Len Borchers,
You are the
acting executive director.
And Gary Huff, and I'm on the board of directors, the chair of the fundraising.
We got the document. Yes. I think for starters, I'll just tell you a little bit about how this was put together. First of all, we received a fairly extensive history of SARC financial data, so we reviewed that going back 10 plus years. Quick summary of that, what was revealed was a pretty strong revenue stream over time and dramatically increasing expenses in recent years. The second source to put these budgets together was a YMCA template. We reached out to one of our sister Ys that's been opening a number of new facilities. They have developed a model where just plug in the square footage, services, and it kicks out you this many staff, typical costs, and so we got that data to use. I also looked at other actual Ys, Bremerton, for example, which has a pool similar in size to what SARC is. It's also a leased facility with the city. Additionally, we did do a market survey to find out if there was interest in the Y being in swim. We got a strong response. And he came back with some revenue numbers. They discounted those dramatically, used the lowest level of estimate that they had just to be on the safe side. And then finally, after all those, it's been 10 years worth of budget experience and what I knew to be true and different about the marketplace, and then came up with the current proposal. There's a number of documents here. The first one is really a startup. We originally thought we might be able to get this going in June or July. This is indicative of a September startup. Assuming we're going to have 4 to 6 months after if we're successful, get the approval on the air hammer system to get that installed, make other changes to the facility. So that's the first page. It shows basically an operating deficit of $58,000 to $60,000 over that fall startup period. In addition to the operations, we anticipate investing another $110,000 in equipment and facility repairs on our own. So that's the first start. Go to the second page, spread that out, showing the startup 2016 partial year. That could obviously change depending on if we're fortunate to get in these sooner or later. Those numbers will obviously change. And then went out 6 years with nominal increases year to year, and there's a few significant changes highlighted on the comment sheet. We do anticipate that this operation will be successful. It will generate a surplus that will allow us to continue the investments in the facilities and keep operating successfully for a long time. Questions?
Maybe a comment before we get to questions, and that is, you probably noticed that the top line on the opening, the first sheet, and in the 5 years, the top line is contributions. And so let me just real quickly kind of walk through why we believe we can bring in this kind of money in contributions. You notice the first year, we're projecting $150,000 in contributions. And what this is based on are 3 different things. One, when we started this process, I immediately started talking with potential donors in SQUIM. And there's a lot of interest and a lot of excitement there. I've talked with over 52 possible potential donors. And we've identified about $90,000 in contributions. And most of them, I believe, are going to be ongoing, most of that 90,000. It includes individuals, businesses, banks, foundations. Also includes 3 foundations. The second thing this is based on is, and now, oh, by the way, no, I don't have a signed contract with those people that they're going to give that money. That's not the way numbers work, but we do believe them when they say they're going to, that they would, if the YMCA, there was a YMCA run operation, they would give this amount of money, and we do believe them. Eventually, they would sign a pledge, but probably not until after we have an agreement with SARC. Anyway, the second piece of information was that in this study that Lynn talked about, and by the way, every YMCA project, big project that we do, the YMCA, this is a kind of a national best practices, we do a marketing study with a professional marketing group. And this group is out of Spokane, and is a very good group. And I've seen them work before, seen their work, and they're pretty accurate. Anyway, their survey showed that 30% of the people surveyed would donate to this kind of operation. And the way they couch that question is that the YMCA's policy is that no one is turned away because of inability to pay the full cost. Okay, so the YMCA would have to raise that money each year to do that. Would you be willing to donate to that kind of operation? 30% of the people surveyed said yes, and that would reflect that would translate into about 300 to 400 donations, because the number of people they surveyed they had a formula, that you can translate that into the total for the whole district. The third piece of information was that each year, we do the same thing here in Port Angeles. We say that no one's going to be turned away, and we do raise the money. We raise $130,000 in Port Angeles each year to do that, to cover those costs. And we believe we can do the same in Sequim. We have, and these contributions are over and above the contracts that we will have with Olympic Medical Center, with the city of Sequim, with the school district. It's over and above those. Those are listed here as government contracts or rent. In the case of Olympic Medical Center, it's listed as rent, $60,000 a year. So it's over and above that. We have met recently with the tribe. They are very positive, very interested. Couldn't give us a number till the end of this month, but want to be a partner also, just like Olympic Medical Center, the city, etc. Anyway, so I just want to kind of give you, that's what these are based on in many years of experience in raising money.
Well, I've been looking over these numbers. They look really solid to me. And I don't have any concerns about your ability to do this level of fundraising in the community. To me, it's in line with reality based on my own experience. And it was particularly nice to see that in future years, this budget requires actually less of a reliance on contributions than it does, per year than here in the startup year. So theoretically, if you've got people who are excited about doing something to help get it going, you're not necessarily relying on that same level of enthusiasm from all your donors from here on out.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm really interested in addressing the issue of the long-term maintenance. My understanding is that SARC used funds that had been dedicated for long-term maintenance to perform operations. Got to the point where they needed to replenish the funds, requested assistance from the public, and it did not occur. As a result, the fund that they had for long-term maintenance decreased quite a bit. In fact, I don't know the exact balance today, but I'm assuming it's not very much, very close to zero. So a couple of questions for you. And strategically, the reason to address this is that's sort of what got us into this situation. That if that fund had been managed differently, maybe it would have been the case 2 years ago. Someone would have raised their hand to, we can't use these funds. We need to ask the public what to do. So one question is, I understand that the Y has reserves. Is the Y prepared to contribute any of your reserves to this project in the event that a couple of months after you fix the air handler, something else pops up that costs a 6-digit expense? I mean, are you legally able to transfer the monies? Is that a tool that you have available to you financially?
Absolutely. We have not made a decision on what our ultimate contribution would come out of reserves to help fund this. That will be part of our last decision based on where we end up with other kinds of fundraising. But we do have that. And we have created a fund that's cash, I think, sitting on about $180,000 right now that's earmarked for facility purposes. And so we have that available. We also have a line of credit. We're trying to obviously do this without borrowing if we need to, but to be safe, we want to make sure that we've got resources lined up for anything that comes along. The big thing we don't know is some of the timing of what's going to happen. Obviously, if something breaks, you never know that, but what the membership trend will be over time, how quickly fundraising contributions might come in, and somebody could make a big pledge, but you might want to pay it over several years. And so just the timing of that is something that we want to be prepared for.
How much is the line of credit?
Right now, $100,000.
So you've got potentially $250,000 available should something develop you need to immediately address.
I believe Lynn has done a lot of work with people looking at the building, looking at the equipment beyond, and the whole operation, to try to figure out exactly where we stand. There were some studies that were done beforehand, and they gave us copies of those studies. You know, one, of course, with the air handler, that was a big one. But there were other studies done on the siding and the roof, et cetera. And so we do have information. And Lynn, looking at what are the potential costs and working with some SARC people and looking at what are the potential issues. One other thing that I would say, just so you, maybe this might help answer your question a little bit. We would see this as like opening a new YMCA. That's how we would see this. It would probably be called something like the Squim YMCA. And it would be a part of our, we have a branch in Port Angeles, we have one in Port Townsend, and there would be one in Squim. A member of one would be a member of all of them. So if you were to join one, you'd be a member of all three. So it's what I'm saying is it's one system. In other words, it would be the Olympic Peninsula YMCA, and this would be part of it.
So do you have a target for long-term maintenance funds in your budgeting process that says, you'll start building it today, but at some point in the future, let's say 5 years, here's an amount that you're targeting?
We haven't memorialized that in terms of a board action or anything like that. Knowing the biggest single thing that we're aware of there is, of course, the area. And once that's taken care of, that moves a lot of that off. We've looked at all the other systems, other HVAC units, the pool itself. I've got built into that first $110,000, replacing 2 of the 3 major pumps in there just because of their age and efficiency. Improve that. So try to get most of those big things out of the way. But any building's going to have ongoing issues, whether it's leaking roofs, landscaping, all that kind of thing. Personally, getting somewhere in the $300,000 to $500,000 range, because at some point we're going to want looking at that air system again before we're out of this operation. If we're in there for 20 years, it's going to recycle on us. So that would be kind of a working target at this point in time.
So in your first year or two, how much are you going to increase that account by?
Right now, based on this, we probably looking at 120 to 150 total for the first 2 years. Yeah.
And then your target would be in the neighborhood of the air handler expense?
Yeah, say 3 to 5, something like that.
And then has there been conversation with the landlord? And I understand that SART is the landlord. If I understand the way you're going to organize your relationship is they will maintain the asset. They will maintain ownership of the asset. And you will lease the asset, is that correct? Okay, and under that arrangement, who is responsible for the major repairs to the asset? Have you guys worked that out yet?
We are. We haven't have the detailed language on that, but we're going to assume all ongoing facility maintenance.
So I'm wondering if you could ever leverage the asset to get a loan. Under that arrangement, it sounds like SART doesn't have anything to contribute toward long-term maintenance because the balance is about zero. So you're going to take an agreement with them that says you assume that responsibility. But if you ever needed to get a loan, you've got an asset. Under the arrangement you're going to organize, could you ever go to the bank and say, I have an X million dollar asset, I need to fix this thing, I would like a loan. And when you have a problem with your landlord, if you were to approach the bank or approach your landlord.
Right. It probably would not work for us since we didn't own the asset. We do own assets here in Port Angeles. Comparable value was modest debt against that, so we're optimistic we could leverage assets if we need to borrow additional funds. It's likely that we will have an ownership position in virtually all of the equipment inside the building. There's some leverage there as well.
It was public money that
Well, I was going to say, back in my old days in the banking business, commercial banks do recognize leasehold improvements as being a fundable item, a loanable item, based on cash flow. That's one thing. IRS also recognizes that as a depreciable item. You understand that as a CPA. But what they could not do as a leasehold holder is they could not borrow and offer a mortgage position on the building. They could not do that. So if something really super serious came along that insurance didn't cover, that caused for the facility fell down and had to be rebuilt. Well, yeah, and again, it depends on whether there's earthquake insurance, whether or not that could be covered or not. It might not be. You might not be able to afford that, or the SART may not be able to afford that. That's the kind of thing that would be at risk here because they cannot borrow against that building. As Len said, they could borrow against other assets that they own if they needed to, but not against that building.
So they could use the equipment if they wanted to liquidate some of the equipment.
Like I say, commercial banking will attach all kinds of things, and leasehold improvements is one of those things that they absolutely would have always loaned for and against, because most businesses don't own the building, quite frankly.
What's it on the books for? What's the value of the asset on the balance sheet?
We've been told 5.5 million by the SART board, 5.5 million.
So here's a terrible question. I have to deal with this as Commissioner for the Cleve Valley Park and Recreation District in Airport. What is your plan should your current financial projection fail? Who owns what? What is Plan B?
Plan B is, first of all, we monitor really closely And as things change, and by the time I'm board, this is what we know today, it's going to be different, I guarantee it. But depending on which way it goes, we will make adjustments, whether that's increasing fees, reducing services, adding services, whatever it takes. We've had a conversation with this art board about, I guess we call it catastrophic failure, things that we can't predict, things that might not be insured. They're sort of hard to define what those are. I guess an ultimate stopgap was we would go to that SART board, is that they have access to public funding at some point. That looks to be the only option. But that's not in the plan at this point in time. We have countless examples of wise running pools, centers successfully. Trust me, we will rely on that experience and that background to help us do it.
So if we wanted to address the issue of the long-term maintenance, it sounds like you've got more than just the air handler as an immediate need. And what I'm wondering about is, what is your timing for those capital expenditures? And what would happen to your business if you said, let's take the first one with an understanding that this application to the Opportunity Fund and your total amount is currently requested exists. But let us watch to make sure as we begin operations there are no other surprises. And then we'll do the next one and the next one. Okay, have you thought through like a capital budget or a cash flow expenditure over 24 months? And then is there flexibility to extend your expenditures? Or do you need it day one in order to open the doors?
The big one, and the high risk one, was the air handler, because if that goes out, the pool shuts down. And that's obviously the primary draw for folks that come to that facility. We just didn't want to risk that going in, with day one or day 100. So that's sort of a contingency. Some of the other, are you talking about other things that are in that proposal other than the air handling?
What I'm suggesting is a methodology where you say, this is what we currently understand. In the event that something jumps out unexpectedly, you'd want to compare that need with what you had previously understood as needs, and you may do a substitution. You may postpone something in favor of the roof's getting ready to collapse, or whatever is your new immediate need.
We've had several, Ken Hayes, an architect, went through and did a very detailed analysis of the building. The firm that's doing the air handler did another one. Steve Burge, the pool here in PA, went through it primarily on the pool system. So we've had a lot of people look at the building. We've been in it, kick the tires and everything. I mean, it's impossible to know everything that could go wrong. We're highly confident that we've identified the major things. We know there's a roof leak in the women's locker room. Got that identified. We've got the funds budgeted to cover that. I think we're trying to be real prudent on that.
So I'm just not sure which comes first, the agreement to take care of the long-term maintenance or the commitment from the county to supply the money to take care of the long-term maintenance. That's my only dilemma on this. I support the project. The weakness that I see is the long-term maintenance account and how you manage the monies for it. I'd like to see them have as much flexibility in case something happens. But I think I'm hearing them say you don't even have an agreement with the landlord addressing how you're going to handle your long-term maintenance. It's sort of assumed it's going to be yours. Is there any flexibility from the landlord or anybody else? I started off with, is the Y prepared financially to contribute or make a commitment?
The only income that SART would have would be the ability to go out after a levy. They wouldn't have any other income.
How about the city?
Well, I can't speak for the city.
I'm just curious.
I don't know what I would say, because I just can't. I would be a wild guess for the city.
Kind of dreaming here, Mark, the idea that working with us to say the animal that hurt, that caused the business to not succeed. If we address that as hard, as firmly as possible, at least we prevent a repeat of that situation. That's why I'm continuously drilling on this issue. And I don't know exactly what the solution is other than you've got good people that have looked at the picture.
And my sense is that it's very difficult to look at this stage of this project in a linear fashion, because every player's piece is sort of dependent upon everyone else all doing their part too. And I think it's absolutely vital to be concerned about the long-term maintenance. I would expect that would be, that arrangement would be detailed, obviously, in whatever lease agreement. I'm glad that the conversation is such that if the agreement were to read the way that it's been discussed today, that the Y would be in charge of that long-term maintenance. To me, that's a confidence builder. The fact that organizationally, they've already got a long-term maintenance fund with 180 grand sitting in it. The financial plan specifically calls out additional set-asides for maintenance and operations, and that the stated goal for the organization across the peninsula is to continue to build up that fund to a higher level in recognition of adding a third facility. To me, I feel like that concern is being addressed pretty substantially, and so as it should be, I guess. So I'm not sure process-wise, how the pieces fit together, but the pieces that I latch onto here over the last number of months are the report that the marketing firm put together for the Y, and they specialize in doing this for YMCA's, so it wasn't the only time they've done this. I can't imagine them providing a more hopeful and positive report, really. And not hopeful in the sense of, oh my gosh, we hope it works out this way, but hopeful in the sense that, wow, this has as solid a potential to work out as planned as anything that they've ever reviewed. And correct me if I'm not capturing that meeting correctly, but their marketing firm said that the results from their study were as strong or stronger than any other market that they've looked at. So that is one significant piece that gives me confidence in the numbers. Your history of operating facilities locally and the Y's history on a national and I imagine even international scale for operating facilities like this provides that level of institutional expertise that was clearly missing for all those years at SARC. And to me, having that expertise and that knowledge base is key. And seeing that at least based on my own experience, your expectation for the role that contributions will play is eminently reasonable. I don't see that as a stretch at all. It's a small portion of the budget, but an important one. And So I personally, I feel very good about this information.
What do you think, Mike?
So what are the steps?
Well, the board specifically asked for these clarifying questions from the last time we had the presentation about using the money. The board's decision was to put off on deciding to make the Opportunity Fund donation or the Opportunity Fund award until after we had the bids come in from the Carlsberg Sewer Project, just to make sure that we had all of our ducks in a row there before we committed this $731,000 or whatever it was. So we are anticipating, as we all mentioned earlier today, we so far had 32 companies have asked for copies of the full plans. Doesn't mean all 32 will make a bid, but it's sure a huge amount, showing there's a lot of interest in companies to do that project. We are anticipating opening bids in open meeting on March 1st. I anticipate the board then will turn that over to Public Works to come back and make a recommendation. We're anticipating having that recommendation and those factors put together for the Finance Committee meeting, which the last we heard was anticipated to be called on March 10th. I would think if all of those things come favorably and shows we have enough money to do the Carlsberg project, we do have $1 million in the Opportunity Fund budget that was designated for undesignated projects. You know, I had asked the board if they wanted me to specifically name, because we knew this one was in the works, and the board at that time said no, just call it as undesignated projects. We have that $1 million in there, depending on how the board. So I'm thinking that by the Finance Committee meeting on the 10th, we certainly should have all of our ducks in a row, so that the meeting on the 14th, 13th or 14th, whatever day that work session is, we could bring this item back and know where we were financially. That's where I am expecting the board to be. 14th would be the work session. I would anticipate we should be able to come back on the 14th with a full review of where we are financially, and the board should be able to give next steps then if they want to go to approve the money, if all is well, approve the money based on what was there. If they wanted to go to a public hearing to change from undesignated to designated, specifically whatever the board wanted to do, we would be prepared to do that, I would think, on the 14th of March.
So I think I heard the last time Mike talked about the BOCC to look at our financial options to then bring the issue to the public. And so if we give that, knowing where we stand financially, submit March, 2 weeks notice, it would be first week of April or something like that.
If we call for the public hearing on the 14th, that's the first time we'll be able to do that after we've received all the bids, correct? So I think unless I'm missing something, which is certainly possible, if we call for the public hearing on the 14th, then that would put the hearing itself 2 weeks.
It'd be the 15th, we'd actually do it Tuesday, and so then we could have the hearing on the 29th.
Any reason not to push ahead with that schedule?
I don't think there's reason to schedule. It's as quick as we can do it.
What's that mean to the operation? I mean, how long does it take after the board says before they get a check?
It depends.
Sark gets the check.
Sark gets the check.
But I mean, is that like a 2 week timeline?
Well, it depends on in what format we do it. If we do it as a pure and simple award, go forth and spend the money appropriately, and we can easily do it within 10 days. If, on the other hand, we do it, depends on the board. If, on the other hand, we do it as a replacement, you go out and get your bids and come in, and as you need to spend the money, you come and we dole it out as you go along. It would be doled out as it went along. Normally, we would do these awards we would give these kinds of awards to the entity based on having a professional staff and department to actually follow through and do the work. Well, SARC doesn't have a professional staff anymore. So it may be that we might want to substitute for that professional staff and help them with their bidding, help them with the, because as a public entity, they're going to have to go bid. And they'll have to award, and they'll have to pay as work is done, and they don't have staff to do that anymore. So I could anticipate that we might step in and help them with our professional public works staff. Perhaps the city of Swim would do that. I don't see the SARC board absent a professional administrator and finance persons being able to handle this kind of a project. And if the Y, and it could be the Y, that could step in and do that for them if they already had an agreement. But I haven't heard anybody say that the Y's agreement isn't going to be contingent on. I've heard quite the opposite. The Y's agreement with SARC will be contingent upon getting this money, having the air handler in. So they might want to consider doing a different kind of an agreement that we'll take over and professionally run, and we'll manage the project of SARC's money, and then the county wouldn't have to. So there's a lot of things up in the air.
And can they, and I'm trying to think about how, I don't think that we would want to make the award to SARC should the lease, should the agreement with the Y not work out for some reason. So I would think that, the grant from the Opportunity Fund would have to be contingent upon the formal execution of this relationship between SARC and the Y, just as that relationship would have to rely on.
And that would certainly save us work. If the Y was in place, with an agreement in place, that we could award the money to SARC, and the Y did the professional work to doing the bidding and the construction management and all that stuff, which would be in their best interest, quite frankly, in my opinion, then it would be a lot less work on our part, and we could move forward based on that.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that approach because I heard that you've got access to capital. And again, come back to this issue of the long-term maintenance. If that agreement is in place between SARC and the Y, and there is a pledge of available capital, and that agreement's already solidified before we distribute any funds, then I think we've done quite a bit in terms of protecting the public on this.
So if that agreement were solidified contingent upon the grant from the Opportunity Fund, that seems reasonable.
It does seem to me it would be best if you did it first, contingent on our money, than the other way around, because we would have some complications giving it out.
Yeah, and we are pushing ahead with the agreement. So we have a group that's meeting every week that includes some real good minds involved in it.
Sounds like you've got a date to shoot for. Have you completed by now?
Yeah. Right.
Well, thank you very much, and to the entire Y organization here for all the work that you've put into trying to creatively and responsibly address this.
Coordinate with our administrator as you move forward in the process. We really, I think he's going to have to be comfortable if we have an agreement in place before we move to the public hearing process. We'll have to make sure that we touch base with the auditor and the treasurer as to what contracts or agreements that they would need to see in place before the funds can be released. So I asked the administrator to start working on that process so that, because in essence, this is a little different than anything else that we've ever done before. So we need to double check on what the auditor and treasurer need to see, the various, whatever contracts or agreements they need to see in place before these funds could be potentially be released. You guys have some work to do with SARC to reach an agreement. And I would just caution the board not to go to public hearing until all those pieces are in place, so that the public hearing is just strictly on the funding decision.
Yeah, I would agree.
And obviously, you guys have some work to do with the finance committee. You probably mentioned it there, but let's just get everything in place so that when we take it to the public, it's a
public hearing on the funding decision alone, we don't get tripped up on any of the procedural issues.
And if you come across, or we come across any procedural issues in the next couple of weeks that would cause us to have to bump the timeline at all, then let's just make sure we remain in communication about that.
Because I'd appreciate it if we were able to shoot as straight as we possibly can with the public in terms of when you plan to open the facility. And if it, you know, I hate to say it, but if it means that we take a little more time to dot our i's and cross our t's, we will. And
Yes.
And so to not build an expectation that we don't deliver on as you consider the timeline and remaining in touch. Consider the fact that if there's a need for us to delay so that we get it right, we will delay to get it right. We want to get it right.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Anything else we want to consider? General discussion on future agendas? Anybody want to add?
Nothing to add, but just a little additional follow-up from the about the combining of mental health and chemical dependency, and the other commissioners who serve on that board. Again, we're very thought that it would make really good sense for all three counties, complete boards of commissioners, to get together at some point to really understand the substantial changes that they're talking about. Is that something that you guys are open to working to schedule? We've ever done something like that before, met with other counties, boards of commissioners.
Jefferson.
I'd really encourage it, you know, I don't know how you feel about it, Mike, but I'd be open if it turns out we got to meet, you know, we meet over there in Flint, because it's central.
Right.
You know, I'd be open to traveling.
Okay.
In fact, at the legislative discussion last Friday, there's notes I took that are placed on our desk. There's a couple of pieces of legislation dealing with this issue. And I got to tell you, this thing is way, way complex.
It's really complex and it's in flux, and all the planners are you know, including our own HHS, are trying to make plans based on information that's being released periodically. It's not like they've got all the information and can say, okay, this is how we're going to put this complex puzzle together. They're trying to put the complex puzzle together as they're, you know, receiving the pieces. So it really is quite a challenge. And I don't have enough of a sense for how things have been to really, you know, to see the complexity in the same way that they are. But, you know, they felt like it was substantial enough that it would make good sense to do that. And on a similar note, I had a short conversation with Ron Allen at the Jamestown School of Tribes over the weekend, and he expressed interest in working with me and working with us to do something that he said the county hasn't done for a number of years. He couldn't remember when the last time it was, but that would be pulling together some sort of a retreat or planning session, for lack of a better word, that draws together leaders from across the peninsula, from the cities, from the county, from the tribes, from all of the governmental entities across the peninsula, to look to the future and talk about how we should be working regionally to achieve our regional goals. And I just thought I'd run that by to see if that was something that you guys would be interested in my pursuing with him.
Very good, because it's interesting in the BHO issue. One of the weaknesses in that process is there aren't enough people trained.
Right.
In order to satisfy this upcoming needs. I mean, we've got a problem in terms of unemployment. We've got a problem in terms of a merger. I think having leaders sit at the table and say, what are we doing in terms of our training programs? What can we do to collaborate?
Right. Well, and with the BHO, I mean, so many of the problems are out of our control. They shared with us a backlog of beds at Western State Hospital, and half of the people from our county that need to go to Western don't, because Western won't take them in because there's just not enough beds. So, they go home instead, or spend more time in the emergency room for, they're often spending 10 to 12 days hospitalized waiting for that bed to open up. So, that's what it's.
Well, and you're right in the throes of it, Mark, and thank you for, it's going to be a tough one. I know that at the Legislative Steering Committee meeting we had a couple of weeks ago, we had like 30 or 40 county commissioners from all over the state, and that was one of the topics we worked on for about 2 hours. And it was real clear to me, I had a better understanding than others, and I don't understand really and truly what is going on here. I mean, it's topical.
Yes.
And on the Western issue, there's a piece of legislation that's being talked about this year that says that when the person gets out of Western, it now becomes a town's issue with regard to the care and treatment. Well, where's the money for that?
Right.
So it's a big issue.
Yes. Yes, it sure is.
Next week, we have the climate change briefing. Let's just make sure Trish makes a copy of our current climate change policy.
Yes.
So for the packet, so you guys can review that. And if we don't have time on that one, we'll probably have to come back and just revisit that and decide if anybody needs to make any changes or leave it alone. And then I'm still thinking we probably should try to target the charter review discussion on an afternoon, Monday afternoon. So I'm thinking maybe March 7th or 14th.
Great.
So why don't you guys maybe look at your calendars and get to Jim and find out which one of those dates would work. Because there's probably a couple hours to walk through that and make sure we get. So we tentatively even set for the March 14th, we can get the word out to the charter review folks. Gives them a month. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Sounds great.
At the DNR quarterly report on the 14th, are they going to come in and talk to us?
Yeah, so that would work. So
We'll just say,
So maybe the 7th? Jim, do you want to contact Norma and email this for the charter review and find out if, obviously it's the chair, but she may be out what day in March, the 7th or the 28th for that one, because you guys have transit on the 1st. So maybe March 7th or 28th and see if she's available.
Okay.
See if she delivered that report to us. We said we'd take it up, so I was tending to think we probably should start with her. But
Okay.
she could come back. But we'd have to, we want to make every try to review, we're not aware.
Right.
And then has the veterans made a request to come in and talk to us?
It must be from HR, that policy change.
No, it's actually for veterans themselves.
Remember one time, Mike, there was a conversation since they took over
Right.
to have them come in and just say hi to us, what's going on. And I was over there last week, and they kind of picked up on my hint that we would like to have them come in and talk to us.
Yeah, and we told them a couple of weeks ago, how does March 7th look? I'll remind them of that date and see if there's any problem with that. Gary Veely is the chair or president of that group.
So right now, we're thinking that it's March 7 in the afternoon. We dedicate for
Charter review.
charter review.
Yeah, can you?
I was thinking Veterans Monday.
Right, that'd be in the morning, so.
Yeah, I'll ask them on the
Reach out to
7th
them
or
on
the 28th.
For the 28th, and then let the board know, so.
Okay.
Or we can get it on the calendar as quick as possible.
I'll do that.
Okay, anything else, you guys?
Oh, actually, Bill, one more quick question. You still have me on the agenda to come out to the West End Business Association next week?
Next week.
Yeah, okay. I need to make sure to remind Trish we didn't
Yeah, we
talk about that. I think it should be right.
Excellent.
So, I'll do that and go back in.
Hey, Joe, you're talking about me.
Hazy, you can come too.
So, we'll recess this week's meeting or continue this week's meeting to Monday at 9 a.m. We have a stop over at the Board of Health this afternoon at 1:30. No questions, so ordered.
Yes. All governments to reply. And last time it came to me to fill out, and whoever got it, whether it was the chair or whoever, it came to me to fill out the information about operational information and demographic information on the county. And so when it comes, the carrier will figure it out.
There's a meeting this weekend, a fire meeting, and they said that the response you can do on electronic. I wasn't sure whether it was just an email response or a website.
We haven't received it yet. This was just warning us it's coming, and please be on the lookout. Or at least I haven't seen it.
It's pretty generic.
Okay, anything else? Agreement with the Superior Court regarding handling of judicial administrative records. Okay.
Linda, you want to come on? You signed it.
I did.
Good morning. So the draft agreement that we have before you is an effort to just carry off this administrative thing. In the beginning of this year, the Supreme Court adopted a court rule that pertains to how the public can go about accessing judicial administrative records. It's basically the court rule equivalent to the Public Records Act. But when it comes to certain court records, the courts might not be in sole possession of them. There might be some executive departments, for example, HR, auditor, information and technologies through their internet or through their email servers that also potentially could access and release judicial administrative records. And so this MOU is proposed to be signed by this body in your executive capacity and the courts to make sure that if there is any requests for judicial administrative records in the possession of other executive departments, that they will refer those for handling to the courts themselves. So that's what this MOU seeks to accomplish. It's based off of materials prepared by the Office of Administrative Courts, as well as the MOU out of Spokane County. So if there's any questions, I'd be...
I have one, and Trish and I talked about this. As you know, we're in the process of trying to decide how to revamp our countywide public records requests, putting as part of a budget process and trying to streamline things. And the question that we had was, does this MOU, and you're the perfect person to ask, does this MOU protect the county from providing these records that are in our office or in HR, that kind of stuff, when we get a countywide public records request for things? So, and we do.
You're protected
in that we're protected under the Public Records Act, says if we have it, we have to hand it out.
Yeah, so what the MOU would do is the request would still be processed. If, for example, if you had the auditor's office have a request made to them, pursuant to this MOU, they would alert the public records officer to the courts, and the court would then take over the shepherding obligation for that particular request. And then the auditor's office would respond to the requesting party saying that the matter is being processed and still referred to Superior Court in accordance with GR 31. And then the auditor would be permitted to close out the Public Records Act request under 4256 on her.
There was my question. Can we really close it out?
The auditor's office is a perfect example because a payment record is open to the public. But when I present an order to the auditor, an order of payment, they also require the attached backup, which is the billing, or so the attorney-client services that may have been provided, or the medical records for the expert service that may have been provided. Those things are sealed. So yeah, the payment can be given out, but not the backup for that payment.
Gotcha.
So we do, they need to go to it.
So it's just a degree of cooperation.
Yes.
And what would be helpful for the courts, I imagine, is because you're signing this in your executive capacity, and there might be other departments, I'm pretty sure it's just going to be HR, auditor, and IT, but to the extent there are other executive departments, if you could inform and maybe the next EOH meeting, that this agreement is being inked, we can give copies of it to the executive departments as well.
I imagine it's going to be the Superior Court clerk as well. I mean, he's got all kinds of different.
Well, there are different kinds of court records. There's the case file, and then there's administrative court records. Now, the clerk's probably going to be in possession of the case file, and there's a different court rule that pertains to how you access this. But this agreement is just specific to admin court records, and it should primarily just be Ms. Clevenger's department.
All right.
And Judy falls under
Yes.
And who?
juvenile.
Oh, okay, sure.
So that's what we got, unless you have any more questions. It's been reviewed by the presiding judges. District Court 2 has taken a look at it. They're comfortable. Theirs is the exact same agreement, just Superior Court says District Court.
And do each of the court superior and district have their own public records officer?
Yes.
Separate from Trish?
Yes, so the PRO for Superior Court Public Records Officer is Ms. Clevenger. For District Court 1, it's Keith Wills, and then Glenn Pitt in District Court 2. And then Juvenile Services has identified their own PRO. The name, is that Judy?
Pardon?
The PRO for Juvenile Services.
I don't know. I think it was going to be Jody.
Jody. It's Jody.
Are there other entities within the county that have their own public records officers besides the courts?
No.
Well, yes and no. A long ago policy did require every single department to have their own designated public records person. And we had been coordinating with the prosecutor's office. Those people, when they got a request, if they could easily produce it themselves, they would. And what we found, and then if not, go to IT, some people, go to the prosecutor's office, some people were just automatically forwarding everything to the prosecutor's office, burying them in paperwork that they didn't need to have. And so as part of last year's budget process, a request came from the prosecutor to give them more staff if they're going to be continuing to be buried with public records. And in substitution to that, we had some discussion, and with Mark's blessing, we proposed to the commissioners what we thought to be a less expensive option, and that was to create the countywide public records officer coordinator position, if you will, in the commissioner's office, which my plan was to designate Trish. She's getting ready to go to training on this. And then she then would accept the responsibility for all public records that came into the county in addition to the individual, so that she could track it. Because what we found out is that on several occasions, individual records were being sent to the individual public records officers, say at the sheriff's office or DCD, and they weren't always being followed up on. Somebody lost track, and we had a couple of those. So we decided we put it together, have one place using our automated system that to check in, send it out, keep track, and then Trish would, or her successor, we're trying to figure out what we're going to do now with Cindy leaving, would work with the prosecutor's office on those things that truly only needed to go to the prosecutor with her judgment training. And then the prosecutor's office and Trish together would still go out and help to train all the individual department people, and they would still fulfill their requests that were just unique to their department, but they would do it through Trish, so we could track it better. That's our plan. We're working on it. It isn't fully in place. It will require a couple of changes in policy. It'll require training for Trish, and then ultimately training for everybody. So this would be one more place, one more step, as I read this and coordinated with Trish, is that while we might get it and track it, we would reply back that it's been sent to the various courts, and we rely on them to come back and tell the people requester exactly what it is they're doing.
And consistent with the court rule, so you have 4256 that applies to all of us, and then you have the court rule that just applies to the courts. The three courts have adopted policies and procedures. That's all online. It identifies who PRO is it walks requesting parties through the process, has sample forms, so that people, it should be fairly expeditious. This agreement is just trying to recognize that some court records that might leak out through 4256, your standard public records act requests, need to be processed through GR 31 compliance, and that's all this MOU does.
So from the perspective of the public, we're going to implement a system that says Trish, the
Yes.
person that should contact.
Yes.
And right
That's
now-
our plan.
Yeah, no, that's
We're in the
exactly.
process of doing that. And it's going to take away some of her duties. And again, the plan was, because we had Cindy, who was also up to speed and how to be your clerk, we were going to move her in. Now we're losing Cindy. I'm not sure how that's, we don't know who we're going to hire and how much experience that person has, but we need to free up some of Trish's time to take this over, is our plan. And so we're going to look to that as we hire the new person, looking for somebody with the skills, talent, and ability to take away some of the BOCC clerk work.
So we need to do this MOU, and it sounds like some policy changes before we implement the new system.
Well, we're already kind of doing it.
That's what I was interested in. A member of the public wants information.
Send them to Trish. Send them to the Commissioner's office right now, because unfortunately, we found too many cases in the last couple of years where a couple of them dropped through the cracks and they didn't get responded to correctly, and so we've had to, that's why we're taking control of it.
But that is more 4256.
That is
like
like
compliance. This is a different
It's a different,
yeah. So, the judges have looked at it, they're comfortable with the agreement, it's modeled after other agreements that are used in the state. So with your blessing, we'll just remove the draft watermark, get the judges to sign and present it for signature next week.
And the next agreement, number 3, is the same thing only with district court. The big change that I see between Superior Court and District Court, the Superior Court is very clearly a different branch of government. District Court is not. Yet they have to comply with the same Office of Administrator of the Court rules. District Court belongs to us. We're liable for what District Court does or does not do. So where we're not, for Superior Court, much more so. But at the same time, it's cooperative.
Day is getting broken up, whereby you're doing the second part of your work session at 10:30. And then this afternoon, you have Board of Health. Commissioner Peach, are you doing the legislative committee stuff?
Yes, and actually I got a scheduled conflict on Thursday
Okay.
with KOMP.
Okay.
There's two activities in Olympia on the 17th, and then the legislative steering committee is pretty much all day.
Okay.
Can I call in?
Are you going to be there?
This Thursday?
Yes. We are.
The canvassing board of 2, so you have to be there. I just leave. I'll just have to jet out like a 10 to 2. That usually goes to commercial break.
Yeah, I want to say that I've got meetings in Squim on Thursday, but I'll check my
Okay.
calendar.
Can we move it?
It's probably a little late to do that. I can cancel it if you want me to cancel it.
You could ask if Bill can call in. It might be, well, I don't know, Rich, do you know?
I never
He could probably call in. I don't think that would be an issue.
Cool.
We have call-ins, callers to the show, so yeah.
Can we do that?
Okay. So Mike, you're doing the canvassing board then on Thursday and Friday?
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't quite sure who was on board for that. And then Commissioner Zeiss, you've got the Peninsula Regional Transportation Organization, and I printed out the packet, the agenda packet and stuff.
Great,
You got
thank
all
you.
that?
Yes, I sure did. Thank you.
And then next week we have transit. on Monday because of the holiday yesterday, they moved it. And pool district on Tuesday. Anybody have anything that isn't on there?
Just confirming KMP on Thursday, tonight Bill sent a call in, it's a guy over there.
Casey has meetings and I has meetings and the canvassing board.
So we'll ask Bill to call in and I'll show up.
I'll be there, and mark something, change to the park.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else on the calendar?
Not that I know of. This is the calendar. It is a special meeting with Port Angeles on Thursday, 9 a.m. Regarding their District 2 appointment schedule and procedures. I did put it on the calendar, but I can post this if you want.
Yeah, just
And then you all on Friday, I put on your desk a letter from the United States Department of Commerce, U.S. Census Bureau, about a survey they're going to be sending out. Request gathering information on basic characteristics of all local general purpose and special district governments. I don't know who will receive this survey.
I don't either, I mean, but I remember when we got one several years ago, I think they was giving us a heads up, and that, you know, they are asking operative, we just have that, we have that problem. District courts belong to the county, superior court belongs to the state.
Okay, Parks, Fair, and Facilities, authorization to advertise facility as well. Approved on the August 16th budget.
So this is the last of the positions that were approved in the budget but not yet filled. The board asked to have brought forward before deciding whether we could afford to move forward or how was our budget set up. And in all candor, this was one of the two positions that, for whatever it's worth to you, that I actually recommended in the budget. I mean, all of the others were asked for and approved during the budget session. This position, as well as the one extra in IT that you already previously approved a couple weeks ago, what I heard in my first round of meetings with all the department heads was time and time again, and I asked each department head, are there any positions anywhere in the county other than the ones you're asking for that you feel are a stumbling block, that haven't been filled, or a stumbling block to you getting your jobs done? And this was by far the one that was most often referred to and as being a problem. And part of it was, and as I explained to each of the department heads and to the commissioners during the budget process, as you may remember, part of it was because the Parks, Fair, and Facilities Department back in 2009 through 2012, when we were no longer allowing any positions to be hired during the big recession, they had a lot of people retire, and they got stuck. They went down further than they should have, quite frankly, number one. And number two, Joel, as he mentioned in his discussion with the board, he had just an unusual amount of people this last year that were out on basically injuries. And so an awful lot of the projects that were scheduled and needing to get done, and people were expressing frustration because they weren't getting done quick enough, were just the simple fact that his department, his people working incredibly shorthanded, both because they were down 3 people, as I recall, from where we used to. At one point, they were down 3 people. And then they had a couple people at the same time out on light duty. So Joe, you want to take?
Well, that was a great summary. I put together one if I will do something about it. During the 2016 budget process, the Foster Care and Facilities Department requested the addition of a maintenance for one position. The request, along with all other countywide departmental requests for new positions, was initially approved. Commissioners later decided to reevaluate all requests for new positions and ask that departments again submit those requests in order to make a better informed decision as to the need for any and all potential new employees. I regret that our department has been for many years operating well below an adequate level of service. Due to staffing reductions over the course of the past 4 to 5 years, we have been unable to maintain our facilities to an acceptable minimum level of cleanliness, safety, and accessibility. We're currently responsible for the facilities such as the main courthouse, the historic courthouse, the jail, which is a 24-hour facility, the 3rd Street Professional Building, which houses the health department, and later this year will be housing